everyone, it's Leela from Miss Kiss Creations. Welcome back to my channel. Today's video, I'm going to show you how I created this epoxy method striped tumbler. I'll be working with a 30-ounce stainless steel tumbler from Maker Flow Crafts. I'll also be using Amazing Clear Cast for my epoxy. As for my glitter, I am using Glitter Heart Company, and I'm also using a black from Wal-Mart. Like always, I'll be adding a list of all my materials in my description below, and I'll be adding the links of where I purchased my materials. Let's go ahead and get started with this epoxy striped tumbler. Today I am working with a 20-ounce stainless steel tumbler from Maker Flow. I went ahead and I sanded it down with 180 grit sanding block, and then I sprayed it with 91% alcohol. After that, I sprayed it with spray paint. I used Rust-Oleum Winter Gray. For my next step of this tutorial, I'm going to apply the glitter to the tumbler. I've already mixed my epoxy off camera. I mixed about 5 to 7 milliliters of epoxy total. So that's about 2.5, 2.5, and 2.5 each side mixed together to 5 to 7. It's very, very hard to make a very little amount of epoxy. So when I do tumblers like this, I go ahead and I do one tumbler, and I usually have more epoxy left over. So then I use the leftover for this glitter tumbler. Now I'm going to go ahead and apply the epoxy. And you just want a very, very thin amount of epoxy on this tumbler. You want just enough epoxy to act as an adhesive. Glitter will stick to this epoxy so quickly whenever there's just a little bit of epoxy, a very, very thin layer. So how I like to think about this is whenever I used to spray adhesive for my tumbler to stick, if you remember, or if you've ever done it, the spray is very, very thin. And that was just enough for the epoxy to stick to the glitter to stick to that adhesive. So that's how thin I want this epoxy. You can go ahead and turn off your turner, or you can leave it running. Whichever one you wish to do is up to you, and it's completely fine. You should have such a little amount of epoxy on this tumbler that whenever you do turn off your cup turner and it just sits, or it's not on and it doesn't rotate, the epoxy should not go down, or it should not drip. If your epoxy drips off your tumbler whenever you turn off your turner, you need less epoxy, and you just need to scrape off the epoxy with your gloved finger. So I have my cup turner off, and you can see that none of my epoxy is dripping down or anything. So I just manually turn it with my hand just to make sure I have a full cover tumbler. And you want to make sure that your epoxy isn't drying a lot. You want to make sure that the epoxy is still smooth, because if you have any lines in your tumbler, in your epoxy, like you'll notice the lines, meaning if you push down too hard on your tumbler, you're going to create kind of a line. And the way I get rid of that is I just take my heat gun and I just heat it up with a heat gun, and then it smooths right out. My next step for this tumbler is going to be applying the glitter. The glitter that I will be using today is Fairy Dust from Glitter Heart Company. This is a pretty holographic silver, as you could see if the camera's picking it up. I pour my glitter into a Dixie Cup. This allows me to have more control over my tumbler, or over the glitter, so I don't dump it. I like to let y'all know that I do have a heavy hand. And then go ahead and just dump your glitter onto your tumbler, and just make sure you have a full covered tumbler. I had to stop the video because I had my over fan on, so make sure you have all fans off, because your glitter will go everywhere except for where you want it to go. So make sure all your fans and anything like that is turned off. Windows are closed. Your glitter will blow around everywhere. There's no rhyme or reason on how you do this. I just start from the top and then I go down to the bottom. And then I have a catch paper underneath my tumbler, if you can see. That's just catching all the excess glitter from the tumbler, so I can just pour that right back into my Dixie cup and just repeat this process. I'm now going to allow this tumbler to spin on the cup turner for about 3 hours. I'm then going to turn off my cup turner, and then I'm going to let it air dry or air cure for another hour or so. So I'm gonna have a total drying curing time of about 4 to 5 hours. Once the 4 to 5 hours is up, I will go ahead and see y'all then. All right, y'all, I'm back with the tumbler, and it has been spinning and drying on the turner for about 2 to 4 hours. So the epoxy underneath the glitter is completely dried. For my next step of this tutorial, I am going to apply epoxy over the glitter. I've mixed my epoxy off camera, and I mixed about 30 milliliters of epoxy. That's 15 milliliters of part A and 15 milliliters of part B. Again, I'm working with a 20-ounce tumbler. I'll probably end up using about 20 to 25 milliliters of epoxy, so I might have some left over. If I do, I'll let y'all know. I'm finished applying my epoxy to my glitter tumbler. I'm going to allow my tumbler to spin on the turner for about 6 to 8 hours. After about 6 to 8 hours, I'm then going to shut off my turner, and I'm going to let my tumbler air dry or air cure on the turner. And I want to let this tumbler completely air dry and air cure for up to 24 hours. Allowing your tumbler to air dry or air cure for at least 24 hours is very, very important. The reason for that is because for the next step, after you allow your tumbler to air dry or air cure, you're going to be applying some tape temporarily to your tumbler, whether it's washi tape, painter's tape, or electrical tape. Once you apply the tape to your tumbler, you're then going to remove it, and you don't want your tumbler, your epoxy in your tumbler to remove with the tape. So allowing your tumbler to completely air dry or completely air cure for 24 hours allows that epoxy to stay, and you know for a fact that epoxy is not coming up whenever you remove that washi tape, electrical tape, or painter's tape. I know that was an earful, but it is very, very important to make sure you allow this step of your tumbler to dry for at least 24 hours. So I'm gonna let this do its thing, and then I'll see you then. All right, y'all, I'm back with my tumbler. It's been on the turner for about 24 hours. It's been air drying or air curing. So my epoxy is completely dried. For the next step, I'm going to take my 220 grit sanding block, and I'm just going to sand my tumbler just to sand off some of the little prickly spots around the tumbler. I feel a little bit of the epoxy or the glitter kind of sticking up. Not too badly, but I just want to go ahead and sand it. When you sand your tumbler, you're gonna notice that your tumbler turns white or foggy. That is okay. Whenever you go ahead and epoxy your tumbler, the fogginess is going to be removed, and it's gonna shine right back up. Now that I've sanded my tumbler, the next step is going to be spraying it with 91% alcohol. This just allows the excess sanding dust to come off of the tumbler and to get any excess oil that you might have put on the tumbler with your hands. And now we're gonna move on to the next step. The next step is going to be applying the tape to your tumbler. This is going to create lines in your tumbler. I personally use blue tape. It gives me the most crisp lines, but I know you can use electrical tape or washi tape. I do have 2 different sizes of tape, so you can make your lines 2 different sizes, 3 different sizes, or you can keep all your lines the same. It is up to you. So for this tumbler, I'm going to make my stripes 2 different sizes. I'm going to start out with the bigger or the thicker size tape, and I'm going to show you how I do this. So I'm gonna start from the top. You can start from the top or the bottom, whichever one you wanna start with. And then you're going to just tape your tumbler around. So you're just going to, easy peasy, just go ahead and just add tape around your tumbler. You wanna try to make sure that whenever you end it, make sure you are doing it kind of straight. So if you need to go around and untape your tumbler and then kind of do it again, you can do that. It doesn't matter how many times you do this, as long as you feel comfortable whenever you're finished taping your tumbler. So you see I have my line around my tumbler. And if you notice, I kind of peeled up or rolled the tape just so I can have that little groove there. So whenever I peel this up after I apply my glitter, I can easily just peel this up instead of looking forward and dig underneath the tape to find it. And now I have my tape that's a little thinner, and I'm just eyeballing how much tape I need to go around the tumbler. You can measure around the tumbler to know how much you need, but I'm just eyeballing, and if I have more, I just cut it off. If I have less, then I'll just go ahead and save it for the bottom, or I'll use it for something else. So I'm just going to wrap this around the tumbler, and it's your choice on what size, what width you want your silver. So I'm going to keep my silver the smaller one. So I'm going to epoxy the bigger one. So see, I made too much, so I'm just going to take that, and then I'm just going to roll it. I'm rolling it up just so I have that little pull tab right there. Like I was saying before this, I'm going to make my silver the smaller tape, or the smaller stripe. So I'm going to leave the smaller stripe in place, and I'm going to remove the bigger stripe. And then I'm just going to repeat the process. So I'm going to keep this smaller stripe here, because when I go to lay my glitter, I don't want the glitter to be laid on here, because I want this to be a stripe. And then now I'm just going to take the same piece of tape and just add it around my tumbler and repeat that process. So again, I'm just placing the tape, and I'm just lining it up with the smaller piece of tape around the tumbler. And if you need to use a new piece of tape because your tape kind of isn't straight anymore, go ahead and use a new piece of tape. And then I'm just going to line that up. This piece of tape is kind of a guideline, so you don't have to worry about it being so smooth on the tumbler. It's just making a guideline of where to put that other piece of tape. And then you can leave a little tab up, you can roll it like so just to make it easier. And then now I'm going to add the other piece of tape, which is the smaller width tape. I have my smaller piece of tape, and I'm just adding that around the bottom here. I use a little bit less tape because the bottom kind of goes in, and so this isn't a skinny, what they call a skinny tumbler. This is a tumbler that kind of gets smaller at the bottom. And then that's fine. And then now I'm going to take my big piece of tape off, and it looks like if I add this at the bottom, I will have kind of another line here at the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and finish that up. My tumbler is now taped off, and you see I rolled up my tape just to make it easier for me to pull up the tape whenever I'm finished. I think I'm going to add another small little piece of tape right here just to kind of go with the bottom, just to even that out. I'm leaving a little bit of excess on the top. So you see here, I'm not placing the tape all around, or I'm not placing the entire piece of tape around it. I'm just leaving just a little of the tape hanging off so I can have that small line that I want at the top. This is preference. You can make all of your lines the same if you want. I just wanted it to have a little bit more of the other color than the silver. And then I'm going to take this top of this tape and just kind of peel it inside of the tumbler rim, just so we can have just a good grip on there so that tape won't go anywhere. Now that we have the tumbler all taped off, we're going to move on to the next step. You want to make sure your tape is really stuck down to the tumbler. The reason for that is because after this, I will be applying my glitter using the epoxy method, and I don't want any epoxy going underneath the tape. So I kind of just turn on my tumbler, and I take my gloved hand or just a finger, and I just press down on the edges of the tape, and that allows the tape to kind of stick down more to the tumbler. And I do have my little pieces of tape sticking up, so whenever I want to pull off the tape is just going to come right up, just so I can find my my starting point to where I can peel the tape. So while I'm doing this, I went ahead and I have my extra epoxy to the side. So make sure you are getting your epoxy ready to go ahead and put the epoxy down on the tumbler so we can apply the glitter. I went ahead and I mixed my epoxy off camera. If you do want to know how to mix epoxy properly, I will be posting a video link in my description below, so go ahead and check that out to how to mix epoxy properly. The amount of epoxy that I mixed was about 2.5 milliliters of part A and 2.5 milliliters of part B, equaling 5 milliliters of epoxy. I will not be using all 5 milliliters of epoxy. That's just the smallest amount of epoxy that I'm able to mix. Whenever you're doing a tumbler like this, or when I typically do a tumbler like this, I try to just use my excess epoxy from another tumbler. So it's usually about 2 milliliters of epoxy, but like I said, it's really hard to mix that small amount of epoxy. So using excess epoxy works really well with these types of tumblers. I will be adding some black glitter to this tumbler. The glitter that I'll be using today is actually from Walmart. I really like the shine that it has underneath epoxy. So I purchased this from Walmart. I think it's like $5. And I went ahead and I transferred some to a Dixie cup. A lot of y'all know I have a very heavy hand, so dumping that entire thing of epoxy or entire thing of glitter onto my epoxy will go everywhere. So if that helps you, go ahead and transfer your glitter into a Dixie cup. And like I would any other epoxy, I'm just going to dip my finger into my epoxy, and then I'm just going to spread it on the silver part. Now you can turn off your tumbler turner, because you should be adding such a little amount of epoxy that the epoxy will not drip. So like I say in all of my tumbler videos while applying glitter epoxy, you want enough epoxy on your tumbler for adhesive. So if you've ever sprayed your tumbler with adhesive, with the spray adhesive to glitter, that's the amount of epoxy, that's the thick or the most thinnest layer of epoxy that you actually want on your tumbler. You want a very, very thin layer. It's very important for this tumbler because when I go to remove this tape, you don't want the epoxy to spread. So you want to make sure you're being very careful with this step and you're really thinning out the epoxy. This is very sticky stuff, so epoxy is very, very sticky. If you've ever gotten it on your skin or you feel it on your hands and your gloved finger, you know how sticky it is. So just having a little bit of amount is enough for the glitter to stick. And even if you don't add enough, you can always add another layer and add more glitter. So I'd rather have too little right now and not have enough glitter stick and go back and add more than have way too much. And whenever you take off the tape, the epoxy kind of spreads. So I'm gonna go ahead and finish this up and then we'll go ahead and apply the glitter. I'm hoping I covered every little nook and cranny on this tumbler. It's hard to kind of see sometimes. So I'm gonna turn on my cup turner and then I'm just going to add my, my glitter to the silver part. So if you guys don't already know, this is creating those lines. So now these are the stripes that's going to my tumbler. So I just wanna make sure I cover that section. I'm trying to make an even coverage tumbler. If it's not too even, don't worry about it too much. You can always add more. Once this dries, you can always add another coat of epoxy. Well, we are gonna add another coat of epoxy and then add a little bit of glitter over. And I'll explain that whenever that step comes up. So I'm just covering this and it's not going to look pretty. You're going to see the lines uneven. That's completely fine. And then I have my catch paper and I kind of beat on my tumbler arm just so I can get the excess glitter off. And then I take my paper and I fill it right back up with the glitter. I fill my Dixie cup back up with the glitter. And then I just go ahead and I repeat the process for this last line. Now you can have 20 stripes on your tumbler. You can have 3 like I do. You can have 10. Just make this tumbler your own. However way you want it, make it. That's completely fine. So I'm just going in and I'm making sure I'm getting every little spot here. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but laying your tape is very important because if you overlap your tape and you have a piece of tape sticking out, whenever you peel that tape up, you're going to see that sticking out piece of tape whenever it starts to overlap. So make sure you're being very careful on how you lay your tape and make sure that it is as straight as you can get it. I know I mentioned this in the beginning, but I am using a 20-ounce tumbler. I would recommend using one of those skinny tumblers, the tumblers that are the same size from the top to bottom. So my tumbler is a little wider up top and it's smaller at the bottom, so it makes the stripes a little harder. So I'm just filling in this tumbler with this glitter, and I'm just going to beat on my arm, and I'm just getting the excess glitter off the tumbler. I stopped my tumbler, and I'm going to show y'all I did not add epoxy right here. I don't know if the camera's picking it up, but if you see, there's a silver piece right here. So I'm going to try to, I have my epoxy left over. I'm going to get my gloved hand, and I'm going to dip my finger into this epoxy, and I'm just going to blot a little bit epoxy, the smallest amount of epoxy on this area, because I don't want to go back and kind of patch treat this. I'm going to try to patch treat it now. So this is one way you can do this. So I'm just getting the tiniest bit of epoxy on that area, and then I'm going to take my glitter again and then just pour it on top of there. And then you'll see whenever I turn on my cup turner that the epoxy stuck to the tumbler. So now my tumbler is completely covered, and I'm now going to just let this spin for about 10 minutes. And whenever I let it spin for about 10 minutes, I'm going to rip up the tape. You don't want to leave your tape on your tumbler too long, because then your epoxy will harden. And whenever your epoxy hardens with the tape, whenever you try to remove that blue tape, it's not going to remove. So make sure you are kind of babying how long or how short of a time you leave your epoxy on your tumbler. If you want to go ahead and try it for the first time and just take it off immediately, go ahead and do that. But I'd rather you take it off too soon than too late, because whenever you take it off too late, as y'all know, epoxy cures and your tape will be stuck to your tumbler. Now going to take my tape off my tumbler. I'm going to keep the tumbler spinning, and then I'm just going to pull up the tape. You can do this manually, or you can do what I'm doing and kind of keep the tumbler going and just pull it up like so. You see the tumbler's kind of fighting with me, the turner. Grabbing that tape caused a lot of like pressure on the turner, so it wanted to automatically go the other way. So I'm just holding the arm with my other hand, and I'm just kind of forcing it back that way so I can peel up that tape to have that crisp line. Or you can turn off your turner and just take it off yourself, whichever way is easier for you. Make sure whenever you're pulling, you're trying to pull straight towards you or away from you. You're not pulling at an angle. Pulling at an angle might make the tape kind of come off with the epoxy and tearing up some of that glitter. So now I'm going to do my next piece of tape, and I'm just going to let the tumbler do its thing. You can wear gloves for this step. So now this is actually this way, so I'm just going to pull it up, and I hope you guys can see this. I'm pulling the tape the other way and just letting the tumbler do its thing and spin while forcing it to turn my way. And it's fighting me too, guys, because I'm applying a lot of pressure on it. Right? And then now I'm going to do the last piece of tape. And then I created my starting point right here, so I'm just going to go ahead and pull it right up. And again, I started that tape this way, so I'm pulling it up the opposite way. I hope I'm getting this on the camera. And now you have your 3 lines. And here's the striped tumbler so far. Now, if you do have some overlapping of your glitter, or you accidentally got epoxy underneath your tumbler, you can go ahead and turn off your tumbler. Let me try to find a spot where I might have had some glitter. So I have a little bit of glitter right here. You can take like a paper towel or even your gloved finger and just kind of scrape that off and just kind of clean it up a little bit. Now, do remember, your tumblers are homemade, and as much as we want them to be perfect, sometimes they're just not going to be perfect, but they're going to be beautiful. So that's fine if you have a little bit of glitter kind of peeking through. So like right here, I have a little bit of glitter there. I can go ahead and just take that paper towel or that gloved finger and just kind of wipe that up or push it towards that stripe just to clean it up some. So if you are very, very picky about that, go ahead and just take your time with this and just get all that glitter off of that stripe and push it towards its own stripe So whenever it dries, it doesn't dry in place, because if there are little pieces of glitter on your silver part, like black glitter on your silver stripes, there's most likely going to have, they're gonna have epoxy on it. So wherever that epoxy stays and dries, that glitter is gonna stick there. So go ahead and do this first to make sure you aren't letting that glitter stick to that tumbler. And then once you're done doing this, you're gonna turn on your cup turner and you're going to allow your tumbler to dry or air cure for up to 4 to 5 hours. So I'm just gonna let this spin for a couple hours. After 2 hours of this spinning, I'm going to turn off my cup turner, and then I'm gonna let it air dry or air cure for another 2 to 3 hours, depending on your room temperature, depending on your brand of epoxy. I always like to do a total of 5 hours, just to be safe than sorry. And then after the 5 hours, I'll see y'all then, and then we'll move on to the next step. Hey guys, I'm back, and my epoxy on my tumbler is now dry. Back with my tumbler, and my epoxy underneath my glitter is now dry. It's been about 4 to 5 hours, and you can see that my lines are nice and crisp. Now my measuring for my lines are a little off, so you can see the bottom's a little thicker than the top. This is why I recommend you doing this on a skinny tumbler, or maybe just take your time more to measure. But at least you guys get the overall concept of how to do this process. So now that I have my glitter on my tumbler, my epoxy is dry underneath my tumbler, I now want to apply epoxy over this tumbler. I'm gonna apply epoxy over the entire tumbler. This is to lock in the black glitter onto the tumbler. So I went ahead and I mixed 30 milliliters of epoxy off camera. So I mixed 15 milliliters of part A, and I mixed 15 milliliters of part B, totaling 30 milliliters of epoxy. And again, I'm working with a 30-ounce tumbler, and I'm gonna turn on my cup turner. And if I sound funny, guys, I have my face mask on. I do apologize. It just protects me from the fumes of the epoxy. And now I'm just going to apply the epoxy onto the tumbler. Now what I wanna do is, I'm not going to dip my finger inside of this cup. I'm going to pour the epoxy onto the tumbler, and then I'm just going to kind of take my pointer finger, whichever finger I'm comfortable with, and just kind of keep it on the tumbler and have the epoxy glide around the tumbler. And then I'm just going to lift up my finger. I'm going to reposition the camera to get a better angle for y'all. Again, I'm going to pour my epoxy anywhere on the cup, and then I'm just going to let it fall, and I'm just going to take my hand or my finger, and I'm just gliding my finger across the tumbler. I am not going up and down on this tumbler, I'm just guiding it across. This is going to allow the epoxy to be applied to my tumbler, and also to get it, oops, I have a heavy hand, and also to get a smooth feel on this tumbler. So you want it to be smooth around the tumbler. You see I added a little bit more, that's fine. I have a heavy hand with everything, as everybody knows. And now I have, this finger has some black glitter on here. So I'm gonna wanna put this on the other black area. So I'm gonna wanna put it on the exposed area, or the area that hasn't been epoxied, meaning the black glitter. And I'm just going to guide that on there as well. So I'm pouring the epoxy on my tumbler, and then I'm guiding it around the tumbler, focusing on the black areas first. Now remember, I will be covering this entire tumbler with epoxy. So if you have a better idea, or if you do this a different way, go ahead and do it. But the reason why I do it this specific way is so I can keep that glitter, that black glitter, into place. So I don't have a lot of black glitter kind of moving around the tumbler where the silver is. So I'm trying to keep those lines as crisp as I can. And by doing that, I just apply the epoxy all around the tumbler where the exposed glitter is, or where the glitter is that has not been epoxied. So again, I have my black glitter on my black glove. I guess I should have changed my gloves to show you a different color. But there was glitter on my black gloves. There was black glitter on there. And I'm just kind of adding the epoxy on the glitter areas, because I am taking, because whenever I touch the glitter, it's coming back on my black gloves. So if I would touch the silver part right now, you're gonna see some specks of black glitter. So I kind of want to avoid that as much as possible. So now that I have my epoxy on my tumbler for the most part, let me make sure I have all of the sections of glitter covered. There's a little bit that's not covered. So now that I have it all covered, what I want to do now is I'm going to take a baby wipe, or you can switch fingers, but I'm going to take a baby wipe and I'm just going to wipe off my finger that I used. And I'm trying to take all that glitter off. The reason for that is because, again, I don't want that black glitter to go on the silver stripes. I want to keep that black glitter in spot in its place. So now I'm going to pour more epoxy on my tumbler, and then I'm just going to hold my finger on my tumbler, holding with a little bit of pressure, and that just allows the glitter, the epoxy, to kind of flow. And you're going to see some unevenness. That's okay. We'll go ahead and fix that here in the next step. And then I'm going to take another baby wipe and re-wipe my finger off, or move hands or move fingers. So I can rotate each finger, or what I like to do, less thinking on my part, is to just keep wiping off my gloved finger and then repeat the process in the silver part. So I'm just applying a little bit of pressure. I'm just letting my finger glide on the tumbler, and you can always feel whenever you have a lot of epoxy on here or a little bit. You can kind of feel that. So I didn't do the bottom or the top, so I'm going to take my finger again. I can either alternate my fingers, or I can wipe it off with my my baby wipe. So I'm just going to pour some epoxy on the top, and I'm just going to have my finger glide. You don't want to move your finger at all. You just want, wherever your finger lands, you just want it to stay there. You want to make sure your tumbler is as smooth as possible from up to down. So a lot of times what people do as beginners is these tumblers end up being kind of wavy. So you want to make sure this isn't flatter than the black. You want to make sure it's still smooth. So if you notice that the black is sticking up more than the silver part, just go ahead and add more silver, add more epoxy over the silver part. So just a little bit of epoxy on this will go a long ways. So just add some and just kind of guide your finger around the tumbler, and then you'll see the epoxy kind of even out. And then you can go ahead and just clean that up and just kind of make it smooth again. So this honestly takes some practice, but once you get the hang of it, you'll see what I'm talking about, and you'll see your tumbler kind of smoothing out. If you notice some of your glitter, so like some of my black glitter kind of sneaking or peeking or moving towards the silver area, you can go ahead and try to pick that up now if it's not already stuck to the tumbler. So I have a little bit of stragglers around my tumbler, around the silver stripes. If I see some, I could just kind of scoop it out, or like kind of pick it up with my gloved finger. If that really bothers you, if you want it as crisp as you want, or if that doesn't bother you, or if you know you're going to put a lot of decals over here, what I do if I put a lot of decals in a tumbler like this, I try to just cover up the little the black glitter that's going onto the silver with some decals. I'm going to leave this tumbler alone, and then I'll see y'all in about 24 hours. I'm back with my tumbler, and it is completely dried. You can see that the epoxy is completely cured on my tumbler. Now that my tumbler is completely cured, I'm now going to clean up the rim and the inside of my tumbler. I will be posting my YouTube tutorials on how to clean the rim and the inside of tumblers, so go ahead and check out my description. With these striped tumblers, you can add more stripes to this, or you can go ahead and get some washi tape and you can add more stripes, like smaller stripes between. So I'm going to take a blue stripe and I'm going to add a blue stripe on the bottom and create like a thin blue line look on this tumbler with washi tape. I'll add a link in my description below on where I purchased my glittered washi tape from Amazon. And that completes this video. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope I helped you a lot. If I did, please be sure to give me a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more Tumbler and craft videos. I'll see y'all next time.